2.
All right, and for our last segment of the day, we're going to go to the top 5 tight ends, which I will say is not as interesting as the running backs or the receivers. It's kind of difficult to find that fourth and even that fifth and even fourth tight end. It's not as there's not as many great tight ends as there are other positions. So I'll let you kick it off with starting at the bottom of your list, and we'll go from there.
So bouncing off of what you said there with there's not as many, outstanding stellar tight ends in the league. It's quickly changing, I will say.
Yeah.
In previous years, I remember back in, Jimmy Graham would have been your either number 1 or your number 2 guy up there with Gronkowski. There were years with
2013, 2014.
Tony Gonzalez was up there as the unanimous number 1. I remember Jeremy Shockey on the Giants, and there are definitely tight ends over time that have been just the guy because everybody else was.
We have those now. We have the top tier. I think we don't have 5 guys. I think
right. So for example, Jimmy Graham or Rob Gronkowski would be that number 1 guy that year, and no one else would ever come close to it because, let's be honest, the Seahawks at the time had it was Zach Miller.
Zach Miller? Yeah, he was a beast.
He did his job, but it's like Zach Miller was not going to be in contention with most receivers in the league, though. Greg Olsen also was one of those guys that kind of climbed up into the ranks. Over time, what I'm saying is there are more guys that are being considered that top person as opposed to just one every single year. So our top 3 is actually unanimous between me and Cody, and pretty unanimous with everybody.
I think most people.
Other than Raiders fans. But for the honorable mention, I will just put Kyle Pitts because you know what? He's going to be an honorable mention and probably going to be a top 5 by the end of this year.
I think, but in a few months, end of the year, next year, this time.
He hasn't played a game yet, and there are other tight ends that came to mind when I was making this. I'm going through every team being like, okay, well, it's not going to be Greg Olsen anymore. He's so old. I'm not going to put Jacob Hollister on there because I'm a Seahawks fan. Not going to put Gerald Everett in there.
The Bills now. So.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But I put Kyle Pitts there because this is just following the trend of there are more and more exciting tight ends that are coming into the league.
Yeah.
Just those top 3 guys say when it's what's the trend that they started where it was tight end season or it's tight end.
Oh, yeah. Well, they have the little tight end camps they're going to. Yeah.
Which I love because they're bringing excitement to the position.
Yeah.
They're one of those players.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts is definitely, I think, a top 5 talented tight end right now. I wouldn't be
even without a game. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't think you're too hard pressed to find somebody to disagree with that. He's got all the talent in the world to shoot up these rankings in a few months. So honorable mention. I thought maybe when you told me you had some hot takes, I thought you would have him on your list, and in your top 5, and I was going to be like, oh man.
As much as I wanted to, I'll just start it off. Number 5, I have Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham is not what he used to be by any means. I know that for sure as a Seahawks fan. Coming off of New Orleans to Seattle, he had double-digit touchdown seasons, but injury issues, and it just Russell Wilson works with everybody anyways. He doesn't need the greatest receivers or tight ends on the planet to do what he has to do. But Jimmy Graham needs quarterbacks who need those weapons, if that makes sense. He needed Drew Brees. He needed Aaron Rodgers. He had more success in Green Bay after Seattle. But now in Chicago, I have him at number 5 because I think there might be, that last, the third act of his career might take, might have a bit of an increase considering there's so much promise with Justin Fields is kind of my main thought process behind it. I'm not saying Jimmy Graham's going to be up there with the number 1 guy because we all know who he is, but Jimmy Graham, I wouldn't be surprised if he would. I mean, I can look up his receiving real quick. He's not 1,000-yard receiving tight end because there's only one or two guys, maybe three guys that can even get in there. But I'm gonna just pull it up real quick, and then I'll have you do yours.
I mean, Jimmy Graham. I spent a while looking for my number 5 guy, but Jimmy Graham is somebody that if you look at his last year, you're like maybe you could put him there. He had looked at fantasy finishes of tight ends to kind of see where they rank because you can't you look at receiving. Because if you look at receiving like totals, the receivers are mixed in there, and so it's hard to find the tight ends. And Jimmy Graham was, a top 10 fantasy tight end. That's, that's not too hard in today's landscape of the position. But, on the back of some touchdowns, he's still a good red zone threat. He had a pretty decent year. So, it's not hard to believe that he could be the 5th tight end in a time when there are, a bunch of great tight ends.
So I'll say, looking at his last year stats with Chicago, at 456 receiving yards with 8 touchdowns.
He's not there to get yards anymore.
Right, he's as a red zone threat, and that's a huge reason why he's in the top 5. But with Justin Fields there, I wouldn't be surprised if he has another double-digit touchdown season for the rest of his career.
He's got
over
the potential.
100 yards.
So I mentioned the difficulty in finding a 5th guy for me. 1 through 4 was pretty set for me. And so I kind of surprised myself by going with Jared Cook. He's been, a model of consistency.
It's double-digit touchdown seasons too, I believe.
And his 2 years with New Orleans, he had 16 touchdowns. He kind of had a resurgence in there. The year before he went to New Orleans, I believe he was in Oakland and had a really good year. He's just kind of been a guy who's always been around. And when you put him as a starting tight end on a team, he'll get you 600 yards and he'll get you a handful of touchdowns. And part of the reason why I kind of went with him as well is, now he's on the Chargers. He gets Justin Herbert.
Yeah, I just had to look that up just now.
He's a good quarterback. So I think he's got the potential this year to have another just really solid year. And so for me, when I'm looking at that number 5 guy, and I'm not blown away by anybody, I think I went with the guy who was the most. I could have went with Hunter Henry, who has more talent and more potential, but hasn't really put it together. Evan Ingram is the perfect example of that. He's incredibly talented. He's never really figured out, So there's some guys that I could have gone with. Jonnu Smith had a great year last year, but that was really just 1 year. So I went with Jared Cook because, I didn't really like a lot of the other options, but I think, he gets rewarded for being, very good, or not very good, but for being pretty good, for being solid for as long as he has. And so, that's why I ended up putting him in, and I think the guy that you're about to talk to at number 4 had a pretty good case if it wasn't for, something kind of messing with his claim. So I'll let you. I won't spoil it, although I probably already have.
Yeah, much like what you're saying with finding people to put in the list. I won't spoil your number 4, but that was another name that came to mind. But at 4, I put Gronkowski mainly due to, you look at Gronkowski's stats from last year, they're nowhere near peak Gronkowski. And he's nowhere near peak Gronkowski, just talent-wise, physical-wise. He retired, 2-3 years ago, right? Before coming back?
Something like that, yeah.
So the guy already retired and came back just for Tom Brady. The mixture between him and Brady, let's see, his receiving totals for Rob Gronkowski actually had more than Jimmy Graham. So, 600 yards, 7 touchdowns. Very solid year for a tight end. And then I'm looking at his years prior. That is actually his 4th least receiving yard season in his entire career, and pretty low on the list for his seasons for touchdowns. Yeah. He had a 17 touchdown year with New England.
He was dominant for a while.
Right. This kind of relates with my claim with DeAndre Hopkins, where it's look, if there's someone you're going to give the ball in the red zone with a game on the line, Gronkowski should be one of the top people that you consider. He's an animal at that size at what, 6'6", right? Yeah, he's 6'6". He's of course from the one and only Buffalo, New York, so there's a little bias there. But he is still. Sorry, I think my cats are growling at each other or something. But he's still a target in the red zone. That's mainly why I have him at 4. The stats don't back it up, but that's just kind of how it is with tight ends, really. But it'll get a little more exciting with the top 3 guys.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Gronk, he's always been, but even still now, is still one of the best blocking tight ends, which has to be
Keep
considered.
Going, Cody. My cats are
when we
fighting.
talk about tight ends. Okay, yeah, you go deal with that. But I'm going to talk about my number 4 guy, who I have as Mark Andrews. For me, he was a pretty obvious slot in there at number 4. I think tight end stats, when you look at them, especially after looking at wide receiver and running back stats, are really underwhelming because you don't have to get to 1,000 yards to have a good tight end season. But Mark Andrews, he's played 3 seasons. His first season, he was a 3rd round pick in the same draft where the Ravens took Hayden Hurst in the 1st round. So he really didn't have much of a chance that first year. But the years that he has been the starter, these past 2 years, 1,500 yards, 122 catches, and in 2019 he had 10 touchdowns, which was tied for the second or third most in the league, and was first among tight ends. So 2019 he had a dominant tight end year. Last year his numbers slipped a little bit. Lamar Jackson's numbers slipped a little bit, so that's not something that coincided with that, but I still think, talent-wise, he is one of the better tight ends in the league. I mean, Rob Gronkowski, I think, if it wasn't for taking those years off, probably could have got my number 5 spot. It's just hard to judge, what he's doing now because it's different than what he used to do. But Mark Andrews, I think, is an elite tight end in terms of, I think he is the 4th best tight end. And I think if Lamar Jackson, and I don't want to put it all on him, if the Baltimore offense can figure out their passing attack a bit more, because I think it was, not just Lamar Jackson, then I think, people will be reminded again of how great Mark Andrews is, because, he played in that Oklahoma offense in college to where, it's this new brand of tight ends that are really just huge receivers. We're going to talk about 2 of them coming up. He's got the talent of a good receiver. He just so happens to be big enough to play tight end.
So, quick question, because I'm curious, and I didn't follow him too much in college at all. So he played with Baker, I take it. Was he?
Yeah, I think he got Baker's sophomore year, maybe, or junior year. Wait, no, has Baker been? No, maybe he played with Baker his whole career, I think. So he not like Oklahoma type offense where he was like a tight end that was basically lining up in the slot and play a lot of traditional tight end.
Yeah, I guess the thing with Mark Andrews with me, he was definitely a name that came up when I was making my list. I'm not saying I don't think he's good. I think he's great. Took his dip last year, which really 700 yards receiving at tight end and 7 touchdowns.
Yeah, it's still pretty good.
Great. Yeah. But considering he is that number 1 weapon for Lamar Jackson, and that may or may not be the case down the road, am I going to see the same Mark Andrews down the road is kind of what it is. Yeah. But still a great tight end. But with our top 3, we're unanimous with this one, so we can kind of just tag team this. But at 3 is a guy who some people will think is a borderline number 2 guy, which most of those people are Raiders fans. We're talking about Darren Waller. I think Darren Waller's fantastic. He's quick, very talented tight end. He, outside of Josh Jacobs on that offense, he's a guy that, is going to make the Raiders offense more entertaining down the road if they can just get like a flat out great receiver to throw to.
Devontae Adams. He wants to go play with his buddy. He wants to play with his college buddy, Derek Carr.
Oh, they went to college. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah.
It either that or if Henry
Disregard
Ruggs
that.
will surpass his first year stumble in the league, they could have a really exciting offense. But Darren Waller has been putting a lot on his back to keep the offense progressing and moving forward, because even though Josh Jacobs is a great running back, he's obviously kind of gone up and down a little bit. But Darren Waller at that 3 spot, I think, is perfectly fine, because number 2, he's a lot more talented of a blocker, I will say. But Darren Waller at number 3, I mean, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Darren Waller, I think, is very confidently and consistently slotted in as number 3. I think, in terms of, we're in an era of, like I mentioned, wide receivers playing tight end. He is almost the epitome of that. He is basically a just very tall wide receiver.
This last year, That's insane.
I mean, he doesn't have the body of a traditional tight end that you're gonna inline and block. He's not necessarily a great blocker, but I mean, he is a dynamic receiver. Yeah, 1,000 yards in the last 2 seasons. He ended the year last year with 100 plus yards in 4 of the last 5 games. One of them being 200 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Jets. Yeah, it's the Jets, but it was also the 6th most receiving yards by a tight end in a single game. He has that type of ability, and he's incredibly fast for a tight end. He doesn't have insane speed. If you're putting him at wide receiver for a tight end, he has insane speed and insane athleticism, and that's what sets him apart. But like you mentioned, number 2, we both have George Kittle. Injuries have dinged some guys for me. Like I mentioned, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Julio Jones. But George Kittle is so good that injuries cannot play a factor in him falling down that list. He is the number 2 guy. He's the best all-around tight end if you want to throw in blocking, because he is just an animal on there. He is an animal when he gets the ball, carrying Saints receivers down the field, literally to victory. Just a personal aside, I was playing against George Kittle in fantasy.
I thought you were going to say like in high school or something.
No. Oh God, no. In like a Monday or Sunday night or whatever, and I watched the Niners just throw to him over and over again down the field against the Eagles with no stop, and I watched my win turn into a loss because he is so unstoppable. So yes. I mean, that's the type of athlete he is. He is a freak. If there's anybody that could challenge for the number 1 spot, which is very firmly held by a particular someone, it's George Kittle. I mean, he's young. He's only been in the league for a few years. I mean, he can become an absolutely dynamic guy. And I mean, one thing that I'll mention 2 things. Against the Broncos in 2018, he had 210 yards on 7 catches, the 3rd most yards by a tight end of all time, which is insane. And then in 2018, that same year, he set the record for yards in a season by a tight end, 1,377. So yeah, he is elite.
I mean, even with an injured season, 630 yards receiving with just 2 touchdowns. But the 600 yards receiving is a good year for a tight end, just period. And that was off of 8 games.
Also, he's had, the best quarterback in his career has been Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, he's had to deal with Nick Mullins and C.J. Beathard and, those types of guys.
Was it a Blaine Gabbert for
probably at some point. Who knows? I mean, he's never really had he's never had a great quarterback or anywhere even close to that.
So, double those stats for a full season, he would have been over 1,000 yards, and that's just, only select few tight ends are going to do that. But that being said, I mean, do we have to talk that much about Travis Kelce? We can just talk about him if you want. Travis Kelce is number 1.
Yeah. If anybody doesn't agree with that, that is, surprising. But yeah.
He's on track to being the best tight end of all time. There you go.
Certainly possible. And I want to mention, I mentioned George Kittle setting the record for receiving yards by a tight end in a season. Travis Kelce broke that with 1,416, I believe, last year. And the year that George Kittle set the record. Travis Kelce set it, and then like a few hours later, George Kittle broke it. So I mean, Travis Kelce has been doing this for a while. I mean,
he came in the league in 2013. It was a third-round pick.
Took him a while to get started, but
well, you say that, but his first year in the league, 800 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns. Yeah. Okay, the receiving numbers are already there. Like
that's true.
They already knew who they were throwing to. Next year, 800 yards receiving, 5 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And then ever since then, he's also missed 2 games total in his entire career in the regular season across his entire career. Since 2016, it's just been over 1,000 yards receiving.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned because his name didn't really start to pop for a few years, but he really has. Yeah, he's had those stats his whole career. So I mean, certainly he is getting ready to break tight end yardage records.
That was whether it's Alex Smith years, I think.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, in terms of
whoever else was there, but yeah.
I mean, other than Aaron Donald being so obviously the number 1 defensive tackle, there's not a guy who has a stranglehold on being the best of the best at their position like Travis Kelce. I mean, he's done it for a few years now. He'll probably do it for a few more years. I mean, he is just that good. And so, there's not much you have to say about it because, I mean, everybody has seen what he is capable of doing.
With other positions being, like you said, where it's varying with like hype behind players like receiver, like quarterback, like running back. Every other year there seems to be a new number 1, a new number 2, a new that's always changing because there's all these young people coming in and whatnot. But other than Aaron Donald, like you said, as an interior lineman, and I would say Khalil Mack as an edge rusher, being some of the most guaranteed number 1 guys. Travis Kelce is the most guaranteed number 1 guy at his position at tight end.
Yeah, definitely one of the easier lists that we did just based on the nature of the position. But that's going to do it for us this week. Make sure you tune in to us again. Next week we will be consistently getting these out there on Mondays for the time being as we roll into preseason and then the NFL regular season. We may have to do some time adjusting on that, but we will keep you tuned.
Maybe we'll just watch the games with the audience.
Yeah. So stay tuned for more NFL Dash. Stay tuned for some other just Dash projects we have in the works and kind of relaunching and getting back into the swing of things as the college seasons come back as well. But yeah, so just follow Dash Sports on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. I don't know why that word sounded weird to me. Dash Sports, and just keep following us and keep watching our content. See you next week.